A note to our listeners before we get started. This series delves into sensitive material and contains disturbing content. Please take care while listening.
So the detective in charge of my case at the time asked if he could come over to the house and meet with my mom and I. I didn't know why he was coming over. I remember we met at the kitchen table and he seemed really nervous, which made me really nervous because I didn't know what was coming. And then he started to explain that they were fairly certain that I was the child depicted in a series of videos of sexual abuse that they had been looking for and trying to locate for many years. And when he said that, I thought, no, there's no way that's me. And then he had some cleaned up images that just showed my face. And he started to lay them out on the kitchen table. And my heart just sank. Everything went cold. I almost passed out. Not only just knowing that it was true, that it was me in those videos and that other people have seen them, but also seeing those pictures, all of the memories came flooding back of those instances. Even if things were blurred out, I knew where I was and what was going on in those pictures.
The fear and the anxiety that you feel over these images that continue to be distributed and the shadows that it casts, will that ever be over for you? Do you see a point at which you will no longer think about that?
At this point, unless really serious changes are made with the tech companies, things that are going on with the internet and various governments, unfortunately, I don't see it changing. I used to wish for that, and I used to really think that that was a possibility. But over these couple decades, I have just seen the problem continue. And so at this point, there isn't really evidence that this will at some point not be such an issue for me anymore.
I started working on this problem in 2008. And I'm just on a daily basis mystified by this. Because for 20 years, we have not been able to get our heads around the one problem that should be very, very easy to get your head around, which is children as young as a few years old being sexually assaulted and extorted and brutalized around the world. And we cannot, as a technology industry, as regulators, and as a public, get our head around that. What hope is there for anything else?
I'm Rob Cribb, and this is Arachnid. We're diving right into one of the hottest messes of the internet. A global crisis created by an army of online predators hiding behind anonymity who create and share illegal images of children being sexually abused. The fight to stop this has turned survivors like Sage into activists, willing to put aside their own demons and try to save those who remain exploited. Despite the global scope and the staggering human toll of this crime, it has largely remained off the public radar. There are some things we just don't want to talk about, and child sexual abuse appears to be one of them. None of this is new. There have been solutions around for decades. When networked computers first began giving global reach to this trade of child sex abuse imagery, big tech players saw it, and they proactively sought help from some pretty smart people. People like Hani Farid, Right now, he's on sabbatical from his role as a professor at Berkeley, the University of California. This is a guy who studied computer science and applied mathematics and got a PhD, and he was named a lifetime fellow of the U.S. National Academy of Inventors. You get the picture. But what's so important to this story is his specialization in image analysis. He's been called the father of digital image forensics, or photo DNA. So we visited with Hani to get his take on a problem that has devastated the lives of so many young people and adults. I flew down to Burlington, Vermont to meet up with Hani.
So this is not a First Amendment issue. This has never been a free speech issue. That's a big fat lie that he and Musk have been telling for years, and you shouldn't buy that story. Have we started? Yeah. Okay.
He's not your stuffy professor cliche hiding in an ivory tower. In a couple of minutes, you're immersed in a straight shooting chat in which he names names, points fingers, and effortlessly calls out bullshit.
So it's 2008. I'm a professor at Dartmouth College before I moved to Berkeley. And I get a phone call from a guy at Microsoft, cold call, saying, my name is Tim Cranton. I work for the legal department at Microsoft.
What's the name of that guy?
Tim Cranton, Cranton.
Where is he?
He, I think, just recently retired from Microsoft.
Yeah, so I was leading a group of kind of legal specialists and technologists that were trying to address cybercrime issues.
So we caught up with Tim Cranton at his home in Seattle, Washington.
In that role, I was actively working with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and they had brought forward this challenge because they had these known images that were all in what they called a hash database. So we were trying to figure out how Microsoft at that time could contribute to addressing cybercrime and especially child safety issues online.
And he said, for 5 years now, we have been trying to tackle this problem of child sexual abuse, and I'm calling you to see if you can help. And I said, why are you calling me? And he said, I read an article in the New York Times that you do work in digital forensics.
So it was a cold call. I just read this article, and then we set up a call, and I got on it and, just explained the challenges that we were facing and why I thought that maybe he might be able to help, and asked him if he could explain more about, the forensic analysis that he did, and, kind of like trying to figure out, is there a way that we could work together to address this particular issue, to use your expertise? I was, it was just kind of like I hope this works type of thing. It's like, we don't know what else to do. He was receptive, but also I think he was probably a little bit skeptical at the time.
This is how desperate these guys were. It was like literally cold calling somebody he had read about in the New York Times, because I had been working in the general space of digital forensics, which had nothing to do with child sexual abuse. And I remember thinking, I know nothing about this problem. And he just said, can you come to DC in a few weeks and meet with us? And I thought, all right, maybe I can be helpful, but I didn't think I could, but I'll go to DC for a day.
So you've done no work on child sex
Nothing.
stuff at all?
Nothing. Okay. I was just an expert on image processing, image analysis, and digital forensics.
Okay.
And again, this is how desperate they were. 5 years, by the way, all the big tech companies. And I went to DC, and I sat in a room with a bunch of the then giants of the technology sector. And first of all, I had no idea what was going on in the world. I felt like an idiot that this problem had existed for now decades, where the average age of a child involved in child sexual abuse material was 12. The acts were getting more violent. The kids were getting younger. I had no idea. I had no idea of the volume of content that was being generated and distributed online. And Microsoft and some of these other companies were tasked with, well, how do we tackle this problem?
When this all came to your attention, you started looking at it, I'm just wondering what your impressions were. This is a dark world. This is disturbing material for sure, for anyone to look at. You're a lawyer at Microsoft. Suddenly you're brought into this world. Did you How deeply did you enter into it?
I've never seen the images, but I found the whole marketplace to be horrifying. And really, I became very committed to the child safety issues on the team and always made sure that we were prioritizing those. And then we spent a lot of time with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And then I eventually joined the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So I was the Microsoft representative on the board there. So I would say, for me, I became very passionate about the issue, and there were several people on our team who also really felt it was important that we, take steps to address this proactively.
And what I loved about these guys is they were unlike the other folks in the tech industry. They actually really wanted to solve the problem. And they pushed Microsoft hard. They pushed the other technology leaders hard, and they could because they were Microsoft. They were, at the time, they were the big dog, right? I mean, this is 2008, where Google wasn't Google, Facebook wasn't Facebook, and they were real leaders in this space.
It's hard to imagine that kind of big tech activism on child sex abuse imagery in the contemporary context. Consider what we heard from Mark Zuckerberg's recent testimony before the US Senate. Some of the tech CEOs had to be issued subpoenas compelling them to show up for that hearing. Their corporate lawyers tried to keep them off the hot seat. But 2 decades ago, before Google was a verb, tech company bigwigs invited Hanny to Washington to roll up his sleeves and tackle the problem together.
And at the end of the day, Tim or somebody asked me, "What do you think, Professor Farid?" And I said, because I'd spent the day listening to these guys, I said, just out of curiosity, how many people in the room was a lawyer? And almost all the hands went up. And I said, let me see if I get this straight. You guys are trying to tackle a technical problem, and you send a bunch of lawyers to talk about it? This is absolutely how you don't solve a problem. You guys need more engineers in the room. And I sat down with the folks with Microsoft afterwards, and I said, look, guys, you're trying to solve the wrong problem. What they were trying to do is say, look, people are uploading millions, billions of images, and we need to determine if there's a child in the image, if the image is sexually explicit, and if the child is underage. And this is in 2008, before this AI revolution, and there's just no way you're going to solve that problem at that scale. It was just the wrong problem. And I'd been listening to what a lot of people were saying, and one of the things that really struck me was somebody said that the exact same pieces of content keep getting distributed year after year, decade after decade. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. First of all, it sort of makes sense. And second of all, well, I don't actually have to find the new stuff. I can just find the old stuff. And that should be an easier problem, because if you give me an image and say, hey, look for this image being uploaded, that's a very different problem. Somebody has already told me it is illegal. It is child sexual abuse material. And so what I said to the Microsoft guys, I said, we should solve this problem, and then we'll solve the next problem, and then we'll solve the next problem. But this one is the right way to start because it's more tractable. And also, the other thing I learned is people don't distribute one image or two images. They distribute thousands of images. And if they have just one that I've seen before, I get 999 for free. You just got to find the one bad apple. You don't have to find all the other ones. And they liked this idea, and I went back to Dartmouth, and I started working with, this is how it works, by the way. It was me and one Microsoft engineer and like 12 lawyers. And we just started thinking about what would the technical solution look like to hit certain demands in terms of how long would it take to analyze an image, what would the accuracy be, what would be the false alarm rate. And within 9 months, we had a pretty good working prototype. We were starting to see some really promising results. And within a year, Microsoft released it in their then cloud. And it just worked. I didn't expect it to actually work. I thought, okay, this will be version 1. We'll figure out what's not working, and we'll go back and refine it. And it just started working.
This is PhotoDNA.
This is PhotoDNA.
Yeah.
And today, that technology is still operating on most of the large platforms. And no kidding, it was 2 of us and a bunch of lawyers.
And so what did this look like? Is it a lab or something? To walk me through what ended up happening. He and one of your Microsoft colleagues end up in a lab for like a year?
The process took like a year, but it's not really in a lab because it really is an algorithm, right? So you take known images and you apply a mathematical algorithm to reduce that image down to a series of numbers and letters that's known as the hash, right? And so then if you take another image and you analyze it and then you compare it against the hash value that you see from the known image, then you have a match. So essentially, it wasn't a lab as much as needing to get images to validate the accuracy and then testing the results as it came out. But the beauty of it was that once you validate the tool, then you do not need to actually view the image to feel confident that you found one of these images.
So it takes a year. In the end, they come out with what we now call photo DNA, which is essentially code. Yeah, it's code.
Yeah. And then you create a hash database, right? So then initially it was the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children were sharing known images and then using photo DNA to create a hash database, so that then once you create a hash database, you don't have to actually circulate the images. You just have the hash database shared with trusted people that is just a list of numbers and hash values. And then we started working globally to get a larger set of images. But we wanted to be really careful that the images were clearly child exploitation images. And the tool was such that you could turn up the precision so that there weren't false positives, but you could also turn it down, right? So we just turn it up and say, we don't want any false positives. And so then we had a report, and we were working at that time across the industry. So at that time it was, AOL was very active, and Yahoo and Google was also active. And so we were sharing those results with them because we were giving away the tool. It wasn't a competitive technology. It was a solution that we wanted to be widely adopted.
How'd you feel about it when you saw the final product?
I think it's probably one of the, greatest achievements of the DCU team. And then, once we started sharing it with law enforcement, you'd hear back success stories of saved exploited kids. And there was nothing that could be more rewarding, and it'd always be, it's such a huge problem with making a difference in one kid's life. And it was, then at some point, it's really hundreds of kids that are getting saved. And that was just amazing.
Where does photo DNA stand? When you think about your career, your legacy, where does photo DNA stand?
I think there's one thing at the top of if I think of my 25-year career as academic, there's one thing, photo DNA, and there's really nothing else. There's nothing that even comes close, honestly. Like, we've done a lot of cool things. We've published cool papers. We've discovered cool things. I've trained amazing students. I've taught students. But there's nothing in slots 2, 3, 4, and 5. There's nothing. And here's why. First of all, we took a bite out of a really nasty problem, and we did it at scale, right? This is something that got worldwide deployment, which you don't really get to do in your career, normally speaking, right? And it was honestly what I love telling this story to students, because you tend to think that if you're going to tackle a problem like this, at a scale like this, you need 100 people. You didn't. You needed 3 people who were committed and wouldn't let it go, year in and year out. Like, we slogged away at this for years. And that's how change happens. A small group of incredibly committed people who won't let something go. That's how change happens.
Consider that this is a problem that has already been solved. so you might assume there's a happy ending here. You'd be wrong. Illegal child sexual abuse material is spreading at a rate like never before. And some of the most sought-after images are those depicting crimes that happened decades ago, but continue to devastate the lives of their victims today through constant daily downloads. Think for a moment about Sage. Photo DNA should have rescued her from ongoing exploitation many years ago. It didn't.
So it starts when I was in elementary school. There was a family member who groomed me over some time and then eventually started molesting me, and that escalated to full-on rape. That was on a pretty regular basis. This person did expose me to CSAM as part of the grooming process and would use the CSAM to show me the different things that they wanted me to do. Eventually, they also started photographing me and videoing the sexual abuse.
What were the ages that you were abused?
I remember molestation as early as age 5. However, the majority of the abuse, I believe, occurred between age 8 or 9 and age 12. And of course, I found out later that they were sharing with peers in a network that they were part of. Another thing I didn't know at the time was that they were taking requests from people in their network of things to do in those videos involving me. And so that went on for a few years, and it was really, really hard to carry that secret with me through those years of what was going on. Eventually, I did end up disclosing when I was an older teenager after the abuse had come to an end. And after I disclosed, I was able to find out through law enforcement about how those videos had been spread on the internet. And that day was one of the hardest days of my life. I was filled with so much shame and fear and grief. And in my very late teens and early adulthood, I started to experience some stalking behavior from people who had seen these videos and been a fan of these series of videos online. And it was really shocking. There were things that happened over social media where these people tried to reach out to friends and family of mine and get information about me, what I was up to at that point in my life, and find out where I was. At that point, my original abuser had gone to prison, and I was thinking, I was safe at that point because that person was gone and out of my life and couldn't hurt me anymore. And then this started up with the stalking, and it really helped me realize that this was a much bigger issue in my life than I had previously conceptualized. It even turned out that a person who I went to college with shared some information about me in one of these pedophile forums. And so for a few years there, I just lived in a lot of fear about this issue. It was difficult to leave the house. It was difficult to have relationships and let people in because I felt like I had to hide myself. I had to hide this experience and this secret. And again, there weren't really helping professionals who knew how to help with the mental health issues that were directly related to the spread of the images and the stalking.
One of the deep regrets, I think, of many is the fact that this tool has not been adopted and is not being actively used at anywhere close to the capacity that it might be. What's your theory? What's your hypothesis on the paltry levels of adoption and use?
I feel like there's been a lot of progress, but at the same time, keeping pace with the scope of the problem. So you're falling farther and farther behind and being, unable to really extend the types of partnerships that created photo DNA has become more and more difficult. Everything has become quite polarized in terms of finding blame with big tech. And, which there's certainly an accountability that needs to be placed forward. But there's no incentive anymore for big tech to try to make a difference. The way the laws have developed is that, technology companies actually become more liable if they proactively address issues. And so I feel like if there could be kind of more of a coming together and looking and saying like, all right, this is a problem that we all agree needs to be addressed. And the problem comes from technology, so the solution has to come from technology. And let's try to figure out how to continue to come up with tools like this that can address these issues. And I think everything's become just much more polarized. And then you have the complications of, people being concerned about content moderation, as they call it more broadly, and the implications on free speech. And I think the lines have blurred around that, and that the incentives aren't the same as they used to be to really solve the issue.
Here's how the narrative goes. There's no problem. Whatever you're talking about, terrorism, child abuse, it doesn't exist. You're wrong. Okay, there's evidence that there's a problem out there. We will agree there's a problem. It's not as big as you think it is. Okay, step 3. Okay, problem's pretty big. There is no technological way of solving this problem. Even if we wanted to, we can't do it. That's step 4. And then step 5 is, hey, here's some free technology that you can use. I said, well, we can't use that because we care so much about privacy, or fill in some other lame-ass excuse. It's a moving target. The bottom line is they don't want to do it. They don't want to create the liability. They don't want to be responsible. I just don't think they care. There's no money to be made. I think this is what it comes down to. There's either money to be lost, or there's no money to be made, or there's nothing in it for them. And they have no sense of a moral compass, or this is just the right thing to do.
So it's greed.
Unadulterated greed. Or indifference, or both.
How many people work here?
I think right now we're roughly 85 to 90 people.
So this building that we're in here, this is adjacent to the main building. When I first started coming here, you weren't even in here. This didn't exist.
No.
It's not easy to describe a woman like Leanna MacDonald. I've known her now for about a decade. She's fierce and smart, and from the very beginning of her career, she has focused on one thing: protecting kids. In her late 20s, she saw an ad to be the director of Child Find Manitoba. She got the job, which eventually morphed into running the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. It's a small but mighty nonprofit that now has a vast global network and has grown muscle and earned international respect.
Primarily over the last 5 years, we've really grown as an organization, so that's why you see so many more people.
So this is a new wing,
Yeah.
essentially. So you named boardrooms here. We've been sitting in this one, the Holly Room. A picture of a young girl. Looks like she's about 10, 12 years old. Who's she?
Holly Jones. So Holly Jones was a young girl out of the Toronto area, out of Ontario, who was tragically abducted and then murdered by an individual. And so the legacy of this organization is rooted in missing and abducted children. So at the very, when we moved into this space and into the other building, we made a very conscious decision to pay tribute to the memories so that these children would never be forgotten. So it actually anchors the team, and when we have visitors or even families or survivors coming in, they understand the importance of this legacy, and they understand that as an organization, we never forget why every single day we come to work.
I remember that case. I remember that was a huge national scandal, her death, certainly in Ontario. I remember it very clearly. And one of the darkest elements of that story was the abuser. He was, as I recall, a consumer of child pornographic material, and the police had identified the fact that he'd viewed it prior to committing hands-on abuse, yeah?
This is a very important point. At the time when all of this unfolded, there were, those views of people saying, you know what, it's only pictures. People are just viewing it, it's not the same. It was the first time we actually had a case that with evidence demonstrated that in fact this offender had been just viewing child sexual abuse material just prior to abducting, assaulting, and murdering her. And so it was really important when we started to examine the gaps in criminal law, when we started to look at the connection and the harm done by the availability of child sexual abuse material.
So for the past, obviously, 4 days, we've been listening to horror stories, and following your team doing its best to harness the tsunami of material and to protect these people. It does feel like an overwhelming task for a little charity in Winnipeg, Manitoba to deal with. That's certainly how it feels from our lens. Does it feel overwhelming to you?
Without question, it feels overwhelming. I think that, we all get up every day and we are working hard. We have the most amazing people who do the work that we do here. But it's absolutely mind-blowing that we are sitting and living in this reality that should not be.
Who should be helping you?
I think first there needs to be a reckoning. There needs to be an acknowledgement of what has happened. And I now, every time I am in front of survivors or victims for the first time, or when I see them, I first and foremost apologize and say, I am so sorry. We have failed you, and you should not be here. So it is sort of like that, the reparation is so far away right now, and where we need to start is actually acknowledging what has gone terribly wrong. And so when I think and when we speak and when we bring people together, it is really about accountability. When we have new technologies evolving by the week that have no guardrails or safety nets around children, we are allowing children to play in spaces with adults because we have no way to identify their age. The stories, the gaps, the problems are today endless.
Where do you focus your anger?
Oh, there's a couple parts and places to answer that question. On one, I would say the offender community, the outrage I feel, there are no words. What I have witnessed adults can do to children, there really are monsters among us. And I see that every single day, and it terrifies me. Humans can do the worst things imaginable. And when you think of the most vulnerable people that we have so much hope when they come into this world, when we watch some people wanting to shred the souls of small people, what does somebody say? On the other hand, I look at big tech and the billions of dollars that are being made and all the excuses that are laid out with no care. They have justified all past actions. They kick the can down the road and find all the right ways to justify what they do. We have been asking them to do the right thing for 20 years. In terms of tech, I'm not asking anymore. I and my organization have pivoted to focus on the real actors, like governments, who have an obligation in that social contract to take care of its citizens. And so it is going to be the hard way that we are going to find our way out. In the interim, we're going to lose more children.
When a force of nature like Leanna MacDonald runs up against an intractable challenge, she gets bold. In this case, she unleashes her team on a very ambitious idea, inspired by some simple questions. Why are we waiting for kids to call a helpline to tell us they're in trouble? What if we went looking for the problem and those behind it proactively? What if we could shut them down before they ruined lives? Could that even be done?
What we've now watched unfold is the cesspool of the internet. So now we've seen the failures of removal of this material and how it has allowed the explosion of the material. The anonymity has provided cover for the offender community to share personal information of the victims and survivors. And so we start to do things on our end to help some of our survivors be able to manage, meaning that their safety, looking at ways that we can help with getting their horrific images removed. And we create Project Arachnid.
So these are the real-time sort of rolling numbers of Arachnid. The top number there is the total URLs analyzed, so web pages that Arachnid has crawled. So we're in I guess that's 5.3 billion web pages to date since inception, and then the number below that is the total images that have been sent through Arachnid, which is 169 billion images. About 14 million have been double vetted by analysts as child sexual abuse material.
Coming up next time, how a small team in Winnipeg takes the power of photo DNA and creates Arachnid, the mothership of web crawlers. Arachnid was reported by me, Rob Cribb, and Wendy Ann Clark from the Investigative Journalism Bureau. Written and produced by Bruce Edwards and Suzanne Reber. Allison Leighton Brown composed our theme and original music. Mix and sound design by Bruce Edwards. Data sonification by Michael Corey. Field recordings by Shariar Tajvidi and Bruce Edwards. And Jasmine El-Kur designed our artwork. Arachnid was created by our executive producer, Suzanne Reber. Our show is a production of TVO Today in collaboration with Piz Gloria Productions, the Investigative Journalism Bureau, and the Toronto Star. Our TVO team includes Shariar Tajvidi, senior showrunner, Lori Few, executive producer of digital, John Ferry, vice president of programming and content, and thanks to JP Fozo and Sean Pattenden, my audio colleagues at the Toronto Star. If you appreciate listening to Arachnid and believe in this kind of deeply reported and immersive storytelling, please give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you find your podcasts. Thanks for listening.